Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Pete Norlander, and I am Associate Professor at Loyola University Chicago and the Director of the MSHR program. And I'm very glad to be here. Thank you all for coming. Okay, let's begin. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to HR Insights. This is our monthly conversation about current issues in HR management. And again, for those who are just joining, my name is Pete Norlander. I am an associate professor at Loyola University Chicago and the director of the MSHR ER program. So next month's topic on April 6th is reimagining expatriation, international assignments in the COVID era, and that will be hosted by Arup Pharma at 12 p.m. on April 6th. Again, for those who are coming here for the first time, please mute your phones. You may also turn off your camera. This session is being recorded and may be made public in the future. We welcome questions throughout our discussion in the chat, but we're going to have an open forum in which you can ask questions also in the last 20 minutes. So today's program is going to be a really interesting one. Feel free to enjoy, relax, and think of questions you might have for our two speakers. I'm really delighted to have these guests with us today. Bill Rooney is here. His background includes 30 years of experience in human resources and labor relations at the Ford Motor Company in operations, including assembly, stamping, powertrain, and marketing, sales, and service. For most of his career, Mr. Rooney worked in labor relations, and immediately before retiring in April 2021, which is the topic of our conversation, the Great Resignation, he was the manager for U.S. Union Affairs, responsible for arbitration, wage administration, job security, employment programs, the UAW Ford Training Center, and UAW Ford Apprenticeship Program. He has a master's in human resources from Loyola University Chicago. In addition, we're joined by Dr. Ellen Frank-Miller. She is the founder and chief scientific officer of the Workforce and Organizational Research Center, or WORC. She has spent her 30-year career collaborating with employers, national advocates, and community-based organizations to conduct rigorous evaluations and mixed methods research focused on managerial practices and frontline job quality interventions that help build an inclusive economy where every worker has a job worth having. And she is hiring. So for those of you who are interested or who know someone, please consider checking out this job advertisement I'm going to put into the chat box right now. Just one moment. Okay, and our topic for the day is the Great Resignation. And we're going to be looking at it from two perspectives, the perspective of job quality and the perspective of labor relations. And I'd like to begin by asking Dr. Frank-Miller, Ellen, if you could just kind of summarize for us what it is that your research shows about the connections between job quality and the Great Resignation, or even what you think about this phenomenon we're talking about, the Great Resignation. And then we'll go to Bill afterwards and have a little bit of discussion, saving the last 20 minutes again for open Q&A. Go ahead.
So I'm happy to have the opportunity to have a discussion of the Great Resignation, and I want to explain the air quotes in a moment. There are a lot of takes out there, and I'm going to challenge us to examine those takes through both an evidence lens and an equity lens today. So Bureau of Labor Statistics, 2021, highest quit rates in 2 decades. But BLS data for 2021 also show more hires than quits. So the ratio of quits to hires is basically normal. So my first question is, does the Great Resignation really exist? And the narrative matters because media coverage tends to have a white educated bias. But the biggest increases in quits are in leisure and hospitality and retail. So what is happening really should be called the great churn at the bottom. And people in these lower level jobs are not taking sabbaticals to consider their life priorities. They're taking new jobs where the terms of employment are better. So I argue in favor of a classic economic narrative, which is competition drives innovation. So let's celebrate the Great Resignation. We have a long history in this country of accepting the existence of low-wage, poor quality work, and that is really rooted in racism. We have a narrative of the deserving and undeserving poor, who's worthy of help and who is not, who is valuable, who is fungible. And race plays a central role in that narrative, as reflected in the many social programs that Black Americans were intentionally excluded from, for example, in the New Deal. So the narrative goes, if people have bad jobs, it's their fault for not having better skills or working harder. Why is it okay, though, that bad jobs even exist? Why aren't we questioning that basic premise? So over the last several decades, a major shift took place in the way that employers viewed their labor forces. And this was a shift from an asset orientation to a cost orientation. Now, corporate value statements say otherwise, but churn in low-wage positions was an intentional business strategy to reduce labor costs. And employers de-skilled these lower level jobs to reduce the cost of training, which made it possible to just keep hiring new workers instead of paying experienced workers more. So the math worked out then, and workers were looked at as a disposable commodity. Now, women and people of color are vastly overrepresented in these lower level jobs. So this is an equity issue. When the cost of high turnover in low-wage jobs is built into financial models, we are looking at an example of systemic racism. Now, when I say this worked for the balance sheet in the past, when labor markets were less competitive, white Americans were also less concerned about racial equity issues, but low-road employment practices are just no longer viable. And you could say the barbarians are at the gates and corporate America knows it. We have the Business Roundtable statement on the purpose of a corporation and stakeholder capitalism. We have BlackRock's letter to CEOs. We have discussion of the S in ESG. So the invisible hand is waving at employers, and it's saying that it's time to celebrate the Great Resignation, because American business glories in the benefits of market competition and the creativity and innovation that it generates and the way it drives progress towards prosperity for our country. When companies compete, great things happen. That's why antitrust law exists. That's why we disdain monopolies and celebrate market disruptors. So the great churn at the bottom is no different. Companies are competing fiercely for workers, and we should celebrate that, because companies that turbocharge their efforts to innovate can seize the enormous opportunity to win at the employee retention game and boost their business's success. So what we should celebrate is the fact that wage rates in lower level jobs have jumped substantially. Earnings are up over 12%, and that's vitally important to business success and to employee well-being. Recent research by Just Capital found the top quintile of companies in their living wage ranking have returned 12.3%, compared to bottom quintile companies who have seen a 1.1% return relative to their industry peers. That is a massive difference. The companies that pay better wages are killing the competition who are paying poverty level wages. And the organizational science confirms that better paid workers are more engaged and more committed workers. And just ask any business owner whose lower level workers are stampeding out the door because the competition is offering higher wages. Now, some prominent companies are experimenting with offering healthcare benefits to part-time workers, which Target just made an announcement about that. Some are providing tuition assistance and also creating career pathways to help employees advance within the company. And we at WORC are actually working right now with the Chicagoland Healthcare Workforce Collaborative and 5 leading hospital systems in Chicago to do that right now. So in short, some employers are investing in their workforces. They're treating lower level workers like an asset to be maximized and not a cost to be minimized. And I need to repeat that. Some businesses are innovating by leveraging a valuable asset, which is their workers. And these businesses are celebrating the Great Resignation right alongside me, because workforce outcomes are financial outcomes. And by winning with workers, they're making their businesses thrive. So before I hand it over to Bill, I recognize his work in labor relations, and I want to note that I am part of a proud union household, with a shout out to the AFT-IFT Local 571. So thank you.
Very, very nice.
Thank you. And so, Bill, we've had a conversation before, and so both having many years of experience in labor relations and having recently retired. If you could just add your thoughts onto this topic that we're discussing. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. I thought those comments were really insightful. So labor relations is kind of, we always think we're different, but it's probably some of the same issues that are driving the great reshuffle, resignation, whatever it should be called. So they are seeing a significant amount of churn in the manufacturing facilities across America, because people are going and finding better jobs for various reasons. One of the, I saw a chart, I did something for Peter a couple of weeks ago where somebody had a chart where, what are the main reasons people are leaving their jobs? And it was, want to live in a different area, want a different job, but one of the key enablers, I think, is people are leaving because they can, because the financial reward systems that we used to have, pensions, retiree healthcare, have all switched now to 401ks and things like that. So the price of leaving your job is non-existent. So at 10 years in, when I started, if I had left at 10 years, I would have left a lot of money on the table, because I would have left my pension at my current employer, and I would have had to start over at the new one. So with 401ks and I guess the disappearance of retiree healthcare, being whatever, that people, it just makes it easier for people to go. And so there's got to be other things that you've got to find, as Ellen was saying, that attract and retain employees, that it's not, the money, if we've commoditized a lot of these lower level manufacturing jobs to where you can work at Ford for your starting wage as a temporary employee is around $16.50. You can work at Amazon for $17. You can work at UPS or FedEx for $17. You can work at Target for slightly higher than that. You got to have something. You got to have something that attracts them and keeps them. And so that's one of the secrets to how to maintain and retain employees. And so they're working on that. We haven't found a solution completely, but there are a number of different avenues they're exploring.
Thanks for adding in there. And I want to go back to Ellen for a moment and ask about the business case that you were describing. So you've done a lot of research and work on the link between job quality and organizational outcomes, including attrition. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what you found in your research.
Sure. So, and is it okay, Peter, if I share my screen?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
I want to acknowledge my partners here from the National Fund for Workforce Solution, Claudio and Michaela, who are joining us today. So one of the major research efforts that we have undertaken in the last couple of years was done in partnership with the National Fund, with the generous support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And a portion of that project was really focused on mapping the relationships between outcomes that employers care about, like retention, and the characteristics of jobs and how those relationships are connected and where there are opportunities. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not on the right screen and I don't know why. I am really having technical issues and I'm truly sorry. Give me one moment here. There we go. Think you can see that now? Okay. Thank you so much for your patience. So we did an extensive review of the organizational science, the evidence base, with over 3,000 peer-reviewed academic studies represented here that came from over 100 different journal articles, including meta-analyses. And what we looked at was trying to connect these relationships between outcomes and job characteristics. And what we did was we basically backwards mapped, what do we know about job characteristics that are impactful on the bottom line. And specifically, when we talk about turnover intention, you can see those blue diamonds are ways in which turnover is known to be linked to the way that employers design jobs and workplaces. For example, here, the National Fund for Workforce Solutions is highly engaged with the workforce development community, and opportunities for training and development is known to be related to reducing turnover intention. So companies that want to improve their retention, anywhere you see a blue diamond here, and this is a subset of those, these are the places that you want to focus to improve turnover retention according to the evidence base. So if you're looking for ways to maximize your chances of improving retention, this is a great subset and place to start. And whenever we talk about this with employers, the next question is, well, which one is the best? Where should we focus? And our answer always is, well, let's ask your employees. Because if you decide as a company, and we in our research, we are often trying to ascertain the employer perspective and then also the employee perspective, because as you might imagine, what you hear from the top and what you hear on the front line, there's a bit of a game of telephone and a somewhat of a disconnect. And there's been some great research about that recently that came from Harvard Business School and also from McKinsey, showing that there's oftentimes that what employers think is going on and what employees say is going on is different. So if an employer looks at this and says, you know, what we really need to do is improve our employee benefits, that may very well be the case, and benefits, particularly health insurance, are strongly related with reducing turnover. However, if what employees are saying is that they really want more opportunities to advance within the company, and they're basically okay with the benefits that they're receiving, then the organization is putting a lot of effort and expense into fixing something that's not necessarily broken. So raising employee voice is the key then to figuring out where to target improvements and reduce turnover and tension. So I will stop there.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I want to also share that with our audience here through the chat. I'm putting up the link to the job quality maps that you've worked on so that they can look at them as well, because there's a lot of rich information in there and it's presented very clearly, which is great. I wanted to ask Bill a question about something that we've heard about a lot, and it may not be true, but I want to ask his perspective on this. We've heard a lot about the different reasons why people are leaving, including some of the generational differences. So prior to COVID, even, we were hearing that the younger generation or the millennial generation is job hopping and is, you know, more likely to, you know, switch jobs than earlier generations, which actually doesn't have a great basis of support in the evidence. And I want to ask Bill, since the other story we're hearing post-COVID is that a lot of workers who are nearing retirement age but are not there have left the workforce. And so, Bill, I wonder if you could share some thoughts on both the generational differences you might see and the experience that you've had as well in recently retiring for in your experience.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I think that we'll keep calling it the Great Resignation, the topic, but I mean, I think the pie, if you had a pie chart, has a number of different groups in it. You know, there's people like me. I hit 30 years, and at, you know, Ford Motor Company, I had a pension, a full retirement, and, you know, it was time to just retire early. It was good. And I had a number of friends that did that. There were also a number of friends I had that were slightly younger that, you know, that they had health concerns and they decided to go. So they, you know, they said there was an opportunity for them to go. And so they went. And then you get down to the younger generations, and they've, you know, they're looking for better jobs. They're looking for opportunities to advance, or don't see the career advancement that they're gonna get in the manufacturing sector. There's a really interesting the data that I got from a friend of mine in job placement or employee relations. You know, the long-term legacy employees that are like pension eligible, the attrition rate for them has gone up just slightly, like 1%. The people that we call them in progression, that they're full-time and they're progressing up the wage scale, they start lower, but they go over an 8 or a 4-year period to full-time. That number is slightly higher, but, you know, in the 5-6% range, which is a little higher than normal, but not outrageous. And the temporaries, where they have a path to full-time, but it's kind of, you know, obscured by some things, they're north of 40%, you know, the attrition rate. So I think it's, you know, it's more, as Ellen Mapp, we talked about it yesterday, is job security. You know, if you don't think there's a path to where you're going to be full-time and or get taken care of, and there's a risk that you could be out, and you're going to take care of yourself. You're going to say, hey, I'm not waiting for somebody else to take care of me. I need somebody to, I'm going to take care of myself. So I think there's got to be something employers have to look at that to, make sure that the temps, because we have, used temps for 6, 8, 10 months and then said, sorry, thanks, we don't need you. And so people are going to start taking care of themselves more now. And I think that the job market out there is welcoming that. So I think it's more of your employment status and where you think you are. Do you have a career, and do you see a path forward, to develop yourself? And
thanks. And I want to go to the questions we've received in advance of our conversation. Some people did submit them through the Zoom registration. So I want to jump into them. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them now into the chat box as well. But just to add on to what Bill was saying about the differences here and the complexity, one thing I often talk about when discussing the generational differences is how important it is to break it up into what's an age effect. Like, as people age, their priorities may change, or their personal life circumstances may change in general. There are cohort effects, like we've all lived through the COVID-19 pandemic experience, and that has shaped us in a big way, differently from those who were in earlier periods. We'd have to go back to the 1919 flu pandemic to have another generation similarly affected by a massive global pandemic. And there are these generational effects that could be, the fact that you've been imprinted by a combination of your age and cohort, being a parent of a young child during COVID. So if you're interested in generational differences, I'm just going to put it in the chat for anyone who wants to see. There's this National Academies of Sciences report that kind of talks about how they may not be helpful in understanding workers' needs or supported by research. But I want to get back into those questions that folks sent in advance. And the first one I see, just connecting it to the generations question, is, what are your thoughts on attracting early retirees back to work? And maybe Ellen first, and then Bill can add in afterwards.
Sure. And I do want to say, what Bill was describing regarding the shift, for example, from pensions to 401ks, really does follow that kind of high level sweep from looking at employees as an asset to be invested in versus a cost to be reduced. So that is a parallel. So at WORC, we are small but mighty, and we have 4 generations in our workplace, in our virtual workplace. So we were recruiting early on, and when we were born a year ago, for really kind of a lower level, like research assistant kind of a role, and put that out there on Indeed, which has pretty wide reach, much more so than on LinkedIn, which is really focused on kind of people with an active professional life. So we put it out on Indeed to really get as broad of a applicant pool as we could. And we got an application from a retired professor of sociology, Professor Emerita from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, in her 70s, who had been, as Pete was saying, affected by the pandemic, taking care of her grandchildren, and really eager to just get back into the work. And so for us, because we had an intentionally open recruiting process, and we made efforts to recruit from as broad of a pool as we could, we were able to capture this incredible talent who is acting as our director of research and making an enormous contribution. And then on the other side of things, we are also hiring research assistants for the summer who are college sophomores right now, and having this really great, sort of cross-pollination of different life experiences and perspectives to bring. So I think that the recruiting piece of it and how you go about it, if you go through your professional network of folks who are at your same life stage, that is who you will find.
Great insight, thank you. And Bill, any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, the idea of getting me back to work, that's going to be a tough sell. Retirement's a good gig. But I've done some work with a couple of volunteer organizations, and I've been called to go back to work at Ford. But if I don't want to tell anybody no, and I don't want to take a job and then quit 2 weeks later. So I think it's going to have to, hit me that, okay, this is something I really want to do in order to go back. Because right now I can, between 30 years and retirement savings or whatever, I can say no. So it depends on the situation for people, going back. But if you're in a position like me and have the pension, you're going to really you're going to be more selective and say, well, you know what, I can stay out and I'm fine, or I can go back and get some reward. And like that woman who's working for Ellen found out of Miami of Ohio, I was like, oh, yep, this is aligned with what I want to do. And I think I can help there, as opposed to just going and doing something. So people are more selective,
Thank you. The next question I want to ask is, what should leaders in HR, labor relations, and unions do about this? And I'll ask Ellen first, and then Bill, if you can talk about what you think might be done in partnership with unions, since you've been working on the management side, that would be great too. So Ellen first, if you could.
Well, Bill hit it right on the head, which is that, as I was saying, this is a competitive market. So if you want to win, you need to compete. And what Bill was saying about you need to offer something that people want is exactly right. So now, depending upon what kinds of positions you need to fill and what your particular geography or industry is like, you need to think about what is the best that you can offer. I often get people saying, well, we want to benchmark against our peers. Like, well, okay, better than the next guy is one way of going about it. Setting a standard of excellence is another. So when you think about the work that needs to be done, and you think about what would make you want to take that position, for example, from the research, we know that the level of autonomy that's available in the job, the opportunity, as we were saying, to learn new skills, to advance within the organization, to earn more money, even if you don't want to take on a role with more responsibility, those are all really key things. So we were, having a conversation about in manufacturing, there are machines that need to be run and they need to be, handled in the same way all day long. At the same time, within those roles, you can treat that person and that role as it's a cog in the wheel. It does a particular thing, or you can look at the individual in the role and say, what other talents and skills do these folks have? And where are there opportunities to leverage that? And as part of your recruiting and performance management process, to always be looking at the individual and what talents do they bring. The job quality maps that I just showed you, we had when I was at Washington University in St. Louis, which is where we did this initial work. One of our data analysts had a fine arts background, and we were talking about how would we visualize all this research. And she's like, oh, I'd love to do that. I haven't done that in years. So we took advantage of that opportunity. Well, if you don't take the time to know your workforce, you miss out on all kinds of talent. So really offering something people want, but finding out what it is that people actually want, particularly when you're trying to retain folks.
Thank you. And Bill, if you want to jump in on.
Yep. Manufacturing can be a little bit different, where you're at an assembly plant with 9,000 employees and you're hiring, we hired 6,000 people at the beginning of the pandemic in 6 weeks. It's really hard to understand, everybody's talents and what they can bring. Not that they shouldn't, but you have to figure it out. So you have to find, I think the union and Ford, we found ways to connect with employees through education programs, the apprenticeship programs, and different avenues that can, help people say, oh, if I'm going to leave, I'm going to have to give up that. And I don't know that my new employer has that kind of an opportunity available. So there's different educational and tools, and the seniority system, people, they start to gain seniority and you're giving up that. So there's rewards for seniority. So you get better jobs. And so, tying that, so that's kind of helping people, or would encourage people to stay because they've got a little bit of seniority moving up and they would be able to get a better job. And so if they leave, they would have to start over, if they were in the manufacturing kind of lower level position. So that's at least in a unionized manufacturing sector, that's the way it works.
Great, thank you. And there's another question on the other end of this, which is for the job seeker and what they should consider as their, especially our students who are graduating from an undergraduate program with a degree in HR or a master's degree in HR. What should recent college graduates consider in this world that is very much in flux of work as they're thinking about their careers going ahead? Maybe Ellen first, and then Bill, if you have any words of wisdom. Yeah.
I should say that at WashU, I was in a research position and not advising undergraduates, so I will do my best here. When I think about someone who's entering the job market for the first time, and there's sort of two ways to go about this. One is to say, well, what do people want, and can I do that? And another way to go about it is to say, what do I want and what can I offer? And then how do I match that to what is available out there? I do mentoring with some folks at Evanston Scholars. And one of the things I always say is, what is a problem that really bothers you, that really gets under your skin? That's where you should be thinking about, how can I apply my education and my skills? So if you, for example, are majoring in HR, there's probably some aspect of the way the workplace works today that really bugs you. That's a key to you as to where you might want to focus. So for example, when Bill was talking about, apprenticeships and opportunities, to learn and grow on the job, if that's something that really kind of rings your bell, you focus in on, well, where are there opportunities within training and development? There might be a great job that's really convenient and it's in, compensation and benefits. That could be a way in the door. But before I would take that position, I'd look harder at where are there places that really kind of spark my interest. And then I'd find ways to explain how my skills and experience and training apply, to that particular need. But bring your passion, because people can tell when you're looking for a job and when you want to pursue something that you're passionate about. And interviewers know the difference, and you can guess which one is more appealing.
Thanks, and over to you.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, I echo what Ellen said, and I would say, make sure you're a willingness to learn. You don't want to come in as the expert on everything. You just want to come in. You're willing to show up for work every day, and you're willing to learn, and you want to learn. And there's some areas that they have that interest you, and you'd like to see what they have and what your skills can help to make that better. That everything can improve. There's always opportunities to improve everything. So if you show up with a willingness, an interest in things they're doing, and a willingness to learn and explore other areas and help in there and grow, I think you'll really convince employers that you're a good candidate.
Thank you both. And I'll add one piece of advice here. I'm not only a Loyola University Chicago professor, I'm also a Loyola University Chicago student. I am in a certificate in data science program, and I encourage students to consider their investment in general skills over their career or lifetime, because as we've heard from Bill and Ellen, the change in the structures or the labor market or the support for formal training and apprenticeship within an employer may have diminished over the last 20, 30 years. So if an employer will not invest in you, find ways to invest in yourself is kind of the selfish or self-interested answer I would encourage. And I'm fortunate to be working at Loyola, where that is a benefit that employees have, not just professors, but anyone who works at Loyola has access to some education benefits too. Now, I received a very interesting question in the chat right now as a private message, so I will not disclose who asked it, but it comes at this from a different perspective, which is, we've been talking about job quality, we've been talking about labor relations, but when I attended Loyola 20 years ago, says the question, we learned people didn't leave jobs, they leave bosses. Do you agree with that now? So maybe Ellen first and then Bill.
Oh, 100%. And I will try to overcome my tech issues to come back here to the job quality maps. And I want to point out this bottom category, supervision quality. This is absolutely an incredibly powerful factor that has huge effects, as you can see here. Look at all the different colors here. Perceived supervisor support, the extent to which you think your manager has your back, strongly associated with whether you're going to stay, whether you're going to be engaged, whether you're going to burn yourself out at your job, etc. So there's no question in my mind that managers play an incredibly important role in whether people are retained. So what happens a lot of times, and Bill probably knows far more about this than I do, is that you have someone who's great in an individual performer role. Maybe they're kind of popular with their peers, they get promoted. You're now a supervisor or manager, and yet the employer doesn't think necessarily to invest in building a whole new skill set for you. And so you may be trying your best, you may be a real nice person, but you don't know how to do this new job you've been put into. So I agree completely. And that's a huge opportunity, for employers to invest in employees for huge business impact.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of like when I took my eldest daughter home from the hospital. Nobody said, "Oh, here's the lesson on how to be a parent." It's like, "Oh, you're in charge." And I'm like, "Oh no." I think she turned out all right, but it's the same thing with supervisors, as Ellen said. You're a worker bee, and then you've all of a sudden got 5 direct reports that you're in charge of, kind of facilitating and developing and encouraging to grow and learn and move the organization forward. And if you don't have the right skill set, that can just cause friction. You might be still stuck in being worker bee and never talk to your employees. I mean, I've had bosses that I didn't talk to for 6 months, so I wasn't sure if they liked me or not. But they just didn't have the skill set. So I think that's really important. If you've got a bad boss, can make your life pretty miserable. And in today's environment, it's pretty easy to find another job, and that can really drive folks. So investing in supervisors and their development really can be important.
Thanks. So continues to be a very important factor. One thing that was on the job quality map that I notice and I see and hear in the discussion around post-COVID quits is the idea that people are quitting because they're burned out, that people are dropping out of the labor force or are leaving their jobs because of the concern about the pandemic or issues with childcare or even just burnout. I'm completely exhausted and I cannot take this anymore. Maybe Ellen, if you could talk about that first and how that might be linked to turnover, and then Bill and some of the post-COVID experiences.
Absolutely, and I will attempt to share my screen again on this front. So one of the things that we are not able to display here well is the interrelationships between many of these different factors, and burnout is strongly associated with turnover intention. And when we look at this is specifically the factors related to burnout, we do know that although pay and benefits are extremely important to employees, they are not going to be your way out of a situation with burnout. So work-life conflict, Pete just mentioned, if you are having difficulty finding childcare and you're going to have a lot of work-life conflict, burnout's going to happen. Burnout's associated with turnover. This perceived supervisor support, the opportunity for training and development is one of the things that, when people don't have overwhelming workloads, being able to learn and grow on the job keeps your experience fresh and you don't get as bogged down and burned out. But there are all these physical and safety factors which are so relevant during the pandemic. And that, there are things that employers can do, things that employers can't do. And it's very important. We're just having a conversation with a long-term care facility in Ohio that's facing, incredible challenges, as you might imagine, with COVID. And the important thing for them is to sort out what are the factors that they can affect and what are the factors that they can't, and really concentrate their efforts in places where they can make a difference for workers.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and the burnout factor is real for both salaried and hourly. I've just had enough. And we used to have a path where people would work as hourly employees and then become production supervisors to move up, and that link has kind of been severed because a lot of the hourly employees have said, you know what, I don't like where that path is going. I mean, you're stuck between everybody, the hourly employees and the upper managers, and it doesn't look like it's a good deal. So I'll stay here as an hourly employee, and I can manage my stress and manage my work-life balance better in that situation. So some of the roads up have just people have said, thanks, I don't need that headache. I'm good with my work. I just work 9 to 5, and I go home and I go to my golf league.
All right, excellent. I'm getting a few more questions sent to me from the chat, and you're welcome also to post them to everyone if you're comfortable with that. But I'm happy to also just keep asking them here. And I think I'm sensing a direction toward applications of what you've been talking about in the questions I'm getting. And really, I think people do want to know what they can do to improve job quality, to make incentives better for people to stay on the job, to have better labor and employee relations. One question I want to ask, connecting to the issues of supervisor support, what can be done to develop and train leadership with the existing managers in a workforce to improve the workplace and to improve job quality, and what can be done through then Bill, labor relations and management to improve management quality? So Ellen first and then Bill, thank you.
Sure. I think I'll try to answer this by giving an example from some of our research work, because manager training spans an enormous, range of potential skills and, characteristics that you might try to develop within a person. We worked with a hotel management system or organization here in Chicago, where you have a lot of frontline positions, a lot of high turnover, and you have folks who follow the path we just described, where they've been working at the front desk, they're really good at it, they get promoted to be supervisors. And one of the things this organization decided to do was to offer empathy training for the frontline supervisors, and to try to help build those skills as a way to retain workers. And what they really were trying to do is help both with some active listening skills, but also really this idea of creating curiosity about the other person's lived experience, and learning to ask good questions. So for example, they did a role play. It was a workshop kind of a format, not like a long course, but in the workshop they did a role play where one of the trainers was an employee who had been late to work a lot. And the person who was the supervisor, the real supervisor, sat with the employee and talked about what they were doing, and then they reversed roles. And one of the things that the trainer did when they were in the role of the supervisor is they didn't walk into the room with anything in their hands. And the supervisor had walked in with a piece of paper in their hands, put it down on the table, and it was a report, to report the employee for poor performance. So they brought it into the meeting, and that idea of, they came with a preconceived notion of this person's been late and they need to be disciplined and we have to fix this problem. So when the trainer came in and started asking questions about, well, what's going on in this role play, the situation was that the bus route had changed and there were some unreliable transportation situations, and that was a problem to be resolved, as opposed to, well, this person doesn't take the job seriously and I should write them up. So it was a problem-solving exercise. So in that regard, that wasn't so much a matter of training with technical skills, but it was more training with interpersonal skills, and that empathy in particular gave the supervisors an opportunity to look at a problem from a different perspective. And this is there's another program we're working with right now, a nonprofit that's working with small micro businesses owned by folks who are from minority groups, and looking at how they can sort of understand the lived experience of workers as a way to enter that conversation and improve performance.
Thank you. And Bill, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about leadership development? But I also want to let everyone know that if you want to use the raise hand function and ask a question directly yourself now, go ahead and I'll call on you after Bill's finished speaking. And otherwise, keep sending the questions in the chat. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the leadership development programs largely focus on the higher level people. So you do need to do something for the lower level supervisors and the employees. And, talking to union officials about just as Ellen's example, we discipline employees. You come to work late, it's just a mechanical kind of thing. You're late or you're absent, therefore you get whacked, and there's no real conversation because there's just so many people. You got 100 people you got to process a day or whatever, the number is, but it's 50 to 100 in a big assembly plant. And so having a conversation with each one of them is very difficult. But anytime you're disciplined, and these union guys told me, it's just kind of a demeaning, like, well, screw you, you're not going to listen to me. If this is all I'm going to get, I'm going to treat you back the same way you're treating me. So you really, in a big manufacturing setting, you've really got to figure that out, how to give people time and make them feel valued, and that they're what's going on in their life is important, and trying to figure that out. And that really can be a challenge in a large facility.
All right, thank you. Let me reverse the order and ask Bill a follow-up, and then ask Ellen her opinion on this. Someone has written, how do you show upper management that burnout is a problem if they don't believe that it's a problem? If you're working in HR, what do? A survey of employees, or how do you somehow provide evidence or support a case for addressing these issues to upper management? So Bill first, and then Ellen.
Yeah, Ellen just put a question in the chat. So a lot of our production supervisors have 90 to 100 direct reports. So it's really hard to get, it's in a big assembly plant. You've got your production area is a quarter of a mile. Just in trying to manage, you don't even get to know everybody for weeks on end. So how do you, I think you've got to use the data, with both, we have annual employee surveys, trying to highlight where the issues where employees are burning out. You've got to look at the data on turnover, and just kind of the productivity of your organization. It's a hard one. It's a hard one to explain and get everybody to understand. But I think I haven't thought enough about this and I'm not as deeply researched as Ellen. But I think you just would look at different surveys and try to explain to employers or your superiors, that this seems to be a problem, but it's going to be a tough one, I think.
All right, and to you, Ellen, how do you make that business case?
Well, I agree with Bill 100%. You knew a researcher was going to say you should go to the data, right? And there are organizations that do annual engagement surveys, and annually is really hard, right? Because it doesn't catch changes that happen throughout the year. But folks within HR do have the opportunity in their role to collect data in an informal way. And I encourage you to sort of, folks are coming to you with their issues. There's burnout because you see it and you hear it. So if you're able to collect data, and I was just talking with an engineering organization about this. They have a career coach who's part of their staff. And I just encourage her to keep a really simple spreadsheet. It can be completely anonymous, but to track what are the issues that folks are coming to her with, where are the challenges that she's hearing, and to have something that you can present. Now, it doesn't have to be a formal survey. The other thing is that, when we, as a mixed methods researcher, when we talk about data are not just numbers. Data include words, data include the experiences of people. And when they're captured in a systematic way, that allows you then to look within, for example, different groups of employees, and to get that feedback that you can share in an anonymized way. So you can say, I've heard from 30 people in the last 2 weeks with issues about X, Y, and Z. I want to share a couple of their comments. And if you are able to, in an anonymized way, gives really specific remarks that bring those things to life, that can be very powerful. But when collecting your own data within your own organization is difficult, this is where, the job quality maps, you can lean on the evidence base. And I recognized, one of the reasons the Gates Foundation was so interested in supporting this work is that there's decades and decades of research that I could share with you that demonstrates that burnout is a real thing, that it's associated with a certain set of job characteristics, which you could probably look around your organization and say, yep, that's a low autonomy role. No, there's no opportunity for advancement, etc. You could draw direct lines there, but you should not have to go and read the arcane journal articles that Pete and I both write in order to be able to do that. But there is external evidence that you can bring to bear and to make the case to your leadership. The other thing I always talk about is you probably know what your leadership's pain points are. What are the problems that they're having? What are the things that are making them a little worried? find what those things are and connect what you are observing with regard to burnout to those. We are all, as Bill was saying, we're all looking to take care of ourselves. We know that that is our responsibility. So when you can show the place where the interests align, you have a stronger business case. And of course, I'm always happy to engage and find ways to support folks who are trying to use data and research in their jobs.
Thank you both. And I will add on here that I think it's very important to understand the narrative and the issues that are happening right now, such as the Great Resignation, or that's the narrative, right? So if you can, for example, if you're experiencing an attrition problem and your organization routinely has exit survey data. I remember when I worked in HR, nobody had been compiling that and aggregating and reading all of the comments that people were leaving in these exit surveys that are just routinely administered to present a cohesive summary of what is it that's leading to the attrition in your organization. So it's likely going to be very different from place to place, but there are routine processes that are always capturing information and data in an organization. Okay, do we have more questions coming in from the chat, or if anybody wants to raise your hand, I'd be happy to call on anyone. I also have a few more questions here that were posted in advance. I can go back to one question that came in, asks, what are your tips for looking for a new job for someone who has been in their position for 15 plus years? So this is also in the area of giving advice or guidance to people who are seeking a new opportunity. So we talked earlier about the early graduates or the recent graduates. How about for someone who's been in a position for about 15 years? Maybe Ellen first and then Bill.
So I think you're going to find that I'm about to say almost the same thing. So the advantage that you have of being in your position for 15 years is that you have accumulated an enormous set of skills and experiences that you can bring to bear on your next position. It's sometimes hard to see that when you have, oh, I've been doing the same thing and I don't actually know. You really do. And part of that way to, I think, articulate that is to get someone who knows you well to ask you questions about what you do. And as you answer them, you're going to hear, oh, I have developed all these great organizational skills, or my communication skills have been central to creating success in my role. As far as like, how do you sell yourself with 15 years of experience in the same role? You sell yourself based on your passion and how you bring your skills to bear and how that meets the need of the employer. I would not hesitate to consider someone who'd been in a role for 15 years if they had a narrative for me that explained how the experiences they've had and the skills they've developed can meet the need that my organization has. So I don't think it's phrased, the question's phrased as though, oh, this is a negative. I've been in the same job for 15 years. How do I find a new job? I think it shows a great deal of commitment. I'm assuming that it shows, a real ability to work with other people. People who jump around a lot. You're like, is this person's hard to work with? Someone who's been in a job for 15 years, like, well, they've really learned how to get along with a lot of different people. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I would say use it as a building block that, if you're going to come look for a job with me and you've had 15 years, that's a positive. But I'm going to expect you to say what you learned at that organization and what you developed. So make sure you use it as a positive, that you sit down and take inventory of your skills and your learnings and things, and where you think you can help my organization grow based on the things you've learned and things you might like to develop further at wherever that, if you're interviewing with me on how, you'd like to see growth in this area. If you're trying to switch careers, you're going to have to look at it a little differently, but you can still say, I've learned development, I've learned, training and supervisory skills that can transfer to different organizations. But I definitely would sit down and take stock of what things you've done and learned and how that can benefit the new organization.
Great, and I got another great question here. So when it comes to job quality, and I think this one is best directed to Ellen, is there a big difference in your opinion between, let's say, manufacturing jobs and information technology jobs, differences between sectors, differences between occupations and tasks. The managers also in an organization, would they have different aspects to their job quality than the rank and file workers? And what's your view on kind of the contingencies involved with job quality?
I love how this is framed in a comparative way. And I will say that certainly there's no question that the characteristics of those day-to-day jobs, if you're in healthcare versus manufacturing versus IT, they're very different jobs. And the experience that you have on the job is also going to be different depending on your company. And when Bill was talking about an organizational structure where folks have 100 direct reports, that's an organizational decision, right? Someone in the management level thought that that was a way that would work to handle, this kind of, workforce. So these are all the variations that we see. There are ways in which, though, job characteristics and the relationship to job quality and employer outcomes, doesn't vary. So what does it look like to have opportunities to learn and grow in your role? It's going to look very different depending on the industry you're in, but opportunities to learn and grow are available or can be made available in every job. What does it look like to have autonomy in your role? It's going to look very different if your role is cleaning hotel rooms versus, working on a plant floor versus, programming something in an IT setting. However, the level of autonomy that you have available to you, that's a consistent characteristic. So although, for example, when you're talking about supervision, those challenges are very different depending on the kinds of employees that you have. At the same time, characteristics like being able to be a good listener, to put yourself in a place of empathy, to ask people to propose their own solutions to problems. We talk about having an advice monster. You asked me a question, you just did it. And what did I do? I went right to advice. But what I really want to do is to say, well, tell me more about that. Where do you think there are disconnects or differences across these different contexts where you think there might be things that don't fit or don't work the same? Because that helps you then to uncover, well, what's really going on here? There's a qualitative researcher's answer, right? But really trying to look at these settings, and the contexts are all unique and different. But the heart of many of these job characteristics boils down to the same thing. It's then in how you apply it.
Great answer. And we're bumping up against the edge of our time limit. So I'd like to ask Bill if you'd like to add anything to that, or any concluding comments, and then we will conclude for today and see you in a month. So anything to add?
No, yep. I think that you have to look at the job and what specifically can offer. Manufacturing offers less flexibility, so you're going to have to do something to counterweight that. Somebody still has to put the steering wheel on the car. So you've got to look at the whole job and figure that out as how that works together. No, I appreciate the time in inviting me. I think it was an interesting discussion. Lots of different aspects. I'm a curmudgeon from the manufacturing world, and Ellen's helped and Pete have helped enlighten me to the rest of the world. So I appreciate the time and being invited to speak.
Thank you very much for coming. And any concluding thoughts?
Well, just to say that it's been a pleasure, and I learned so much from Bill and his long experience in a really important sector in the economy. And I will now give a shameless plug with another link. We are hiring a mixed methods data analyst at WORC, and we are a small but mighty startup organization, and hope that you all will share the role with anyone who you think might be interested. So thank you again for having me.
Great, thank you. And again, next month's topic will be Reimagining Expatriation, International Assignments in the COVID Era, hosted by Professor Arup Varma, and that is at noon on April 6th. Please register or look for the announcements. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.